all of Module 5, Lesson 3 on Thomas Jefferson's presidency. When last I left you, I think we were discussing westward expansion as we'd already done Marbury versus Madison. Is this correct? Okay, so during Thomas Jefferson's presidency, a lot of Americans continued their westward movement across the Appalachian Mountains and into the west. All right, as you can see here, a lot of people traveled the ridge along the Appalachian Mountains into the west. Now, at this time, when I'm talking about Kentucky, that's the west. Now, today, Kentucky's not the west, but in 1800, this is on the frontier, Kentucky, even West Virginia. So, most of the people who are arriving in this new frontier territory are going to places like Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee, places like that. One of the natural passages that occurs is called the Cumberland Gap. And you can see it on this map here. And this is a place where Tennessee and Virginia and Kentucky all kind of meet. All right. A generation earlier in 1775, you ever heard of a man named Daniel Boone? Okay, Daniel Boone, one of America's great frontier guides, led the clearing through the Cumberland Gap into the heart of Kentucky. And by this time, a road had been built called the Wilderness Road, and it was one of the major routes for westward immigration. Now, I don't want you to think of this as a big 8-lane interstate highway. That's not what it is. It's little more than like a path for a horse and a cart, okay? But it was a well-traveled path that could take people to the west, okay, into the west. All right, now, the Louisiana Purchase. You ever heard of it?
Yes.
Okay. In the year 1800, the leader of France, whose name was? Little tiny guy, about this tall. Napoleon Bonaparte. He persuaded Spain to return some territory that they had in the New World to France. And when the news of this transfer leaked out, Americans were pretty alarmed by it because we were fearful that, this new dictator in France is going to cut off our ability to use the Mississippi River. Because if you remember, we had Pinckney's Treaty. And Pinckney's Treaty was an agreement between us and Spain, which allowed us to use the Mississippi River. That was in 1795. Well, in 1800, it no longer belongs to Spain. It now belongs to France. And so it made a lot of Americans nervous. And Thomas Jefferson wanted to resolve this problem simply. Let's just go to Napoleon and try to buy some of this land from him. So he sends James Monroe and Robert Livingston to Paris with very specific instructions. You are allowed to purchase the city of New Orleans, which is right here where the Mississippi River empties into the Gulf of Mexico, and as much land east of New Orleans as you can with $10 million. That's the instructions. So James Monroe, Robert Livingston, go to Paris to meet with Napoleon. You have permission to spend $10 million on the city of New Orleans and as much land east of the city as you can. You guys know directions, right? So east on this map that you're looking would be to the right. Okay? All right. So that's all they were allowed to do. Is that what they did? No. How did they go from being authorized to purchase basically where the size of land of that red dot that you can see on the map east? About this much land for $10 million. How did they go from being only allowed to buy this to buying all of this? All this white area of land. Well, that's what we're going to look at. Okay? So, things were not going well for Napoleon. He was having difficulty maintaining his possessions in the Gulf of Mexico, in places like San Domingue, which is the Dominican Republic today, but it's Santo Domingo. And he was having uprisings and rebellions against him, and was not able to recapture them, because you got to figure, if you're in France, that's several thousand miles across the ocean. So Napoleon really was losing interest in holding that territory, as well as other territory in the New World. So Napoleon just said, you know what? Heck with it. I'll sell it all to you. 15 million bucks. Were James Monroe and Robert Livingston allowed to do this? They were given very specific instructions. $10 million for the city of New Orleans and as much land to the east. If you're Robert Livingston or James Monroe, what are you going to do? What would you do? It's a pretty good deal, okay? And they were like, you think Napoleon's the kind of guy to haggle with, especially when he offers you a deal like that? No, he's not. He's a dictator. He's a king. He's not someone to be really messed with. So fearing that Napoleon might change his mind, Monroe and Livingston quickly went ahead and closed the deal for $15 million without getting permission from Thomas Jefferson. They just did it. They just did it. Are they allowed to do that? What if they did get permission? Is Thomas Jefferson allowed to buy land? Where in the Constitution does it say the president may expand the size of our nation almost double by purchasing land? Where does it say that? It doesn't. How does Thomas Jefferson feel about interpreting the Constitution? What does he say? How should we interpret it? Should we have a loose interpretation or a strict interpretation? He says strict. If it's not in there, we can't do it. Well, guess what he just did? He violates his own principles. He purchases hundreds of thousands of acres of land without any permission from anybody. Remember how I said Jefferson's presidency was consistently inconsistent? There you go. The Senate of the United States was much less scrupulous than Jefferson and said, hey, this is a great deal. Doesn't matter what you think, Tom. Good deal. Good job. And the purchase was made for $15 million, which, as you can see, nearly doubles the size of the United States. Nearly doubles. What a great deal. And so now Jefferson is eager to explore this new territory we have purchased. And in 1803, he appointed a man by the name of Meriwether Lewis. Meriwether Lewis, Meriwether, Meriwether, to lead an expedition into this territory called the Corps of Discovery. That was what the name of the expedition was called, the Corps of Discovery. And the Corps of Discovery was to start in St. Louis, Missouri, which was seen as the gateway to the West. Anybody ever been to St. Louis? Is there any big architectural wonders there? Can you think of anything in St. Louis that's unique?
Isn't that big?
The Arch, the Gateway Arch. Do you know why it's called that? Because St. Louis is the gateway to the West. And that is where Lewis and Clark began their expedition. Now, there were already people in St. Louis. It's near the Mississippi River. It was a pretty heavily populated area. But as they move westward, it becomes into territory where potentially no white person had ever set foot. So, Meriwether Lewis and his assistant William Clark, began their expedition there. They started out with about 50 soldiers in the Corps of Discovery. And, they gathered scientific information about unknown plants, animals never before seen by Americans. Not many people had seen moose before. You guys ever seen a moose in real life? They're enormous, like wouldn't fit through that door. Like maybe like with their antlers like 10 feet tall, like would touch a basketball goal, standing up. They're enormous. They're huge, and no one had ever seen that before. And like they're very weird, like, strange animals. Things like badgers and elk, animals that were not found in the East. So they started out with 50 soldiers and woodsmen, and the expedition got smaller as it went, as it was, as you would imagine, very dangerous traveling throughout the West. But they did add a Native American woman to be a guide and translator along the way, and her name was Sacagawea. Sacagawea. And Sacagawea she served as their interpreter and guide. And how long did this expedition take? Yeah, about 2 years and 4 months until they returned. But they recorded invaluable information about these new territories, making maps of where rivers are and streams and fish and everything. Yes. Yep. Okay, so any questions? All right, so go ahead and you can begin work on your activities, which are on Schoology. Try to get those done today, and if you have questions, I'll help you.